History tells us how World War II ended, but after more than 50 years, it told little about why. Why did the United States defeat Japan against overwhelming odds? Part of the answer lies in a revolutionary group of Navajo Indians from the desert of Arizona and New Mexico. Their ancient, unwritten language, difficult to learn and difficult to understand, revolutionized military communications. It became the perfect unbreakable code. That is why they became known as the Navajo Code Talkers. How the United States used these men in the War of the Pacific reformed how the military portrayed and treated Native Americans. The Code Talkers played a significant role in the U.S. winning the war against Japan. Even then, it was 56 years before their country would react and acknowledge their achievements.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
In the early morning of December 7th, 1941, Japanese planes bombed the Pearl Harbor Naval Base in Honolulu, Hawaii. The sneak attack killed 2,400 U.S. servicemen, destroyed 188 aircraft, and crippled the U.S. Pacific Fleet. The next day, December 8th, 1941, the U.S. declared war on the Japanese and threw America into the battlefields of World War II.
We'll gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
In the first months of this war, America struggled, in part because our communication codes were not good enough. For every Japanese code the U.S. broke, the Japanese broke one return, making a surprise attack a very rare miracle. But one morning in 1942, World War I veteran Philip Johnston read a newspaper story about the search for a new code. This gave Johnston a revolutionary idea. Johnston was the son of a missionary and grew up on the Navajo reservation and became fluent in the Navajo language at a young age. He knew firsthand the complexity of this unwritten language and saw it as the perfect solution to the military's problems. He immediately suggested his idea to the Marine Corps Commanding General Clayton Vogel. To convince the general, Johnson conducted a demonstration. He put two Navajo men in different rooms and had them send radio messages to each other. One of the men translated and sent the message in Navajo, and the other man translated the message back to English. It worked. On March 6, 1942, General Vogel wrote to the Commandant of the Marine Corps and reported the demonstration was interesting and successful. He further wrote, "This dialect is thus equivalent to a secret code to the enemy and admirably suited for rapid, secure communication." The Marines selected 29 Navajo men to create the new code. After 6 weeks of easy boot camp in San Diego, the men were locked in a small classroom and told to come up with a word to represent every letter of the alphabet. Keith Little remembers how every word had to be perfect.
There was they give you the paper, they give you the pencil, and they go to the board and they write a word down up there, and you had to write it in Navajo code. They go, they drill you, and then after a while they turn around the other way, reverse it. They say the Navajo, and you have to write down the word.
After they finished the alphabet, they began to create words to represent military terms. They often used substitutions. Chadagahi, the Navajo word for tortoise, became tank. The Navajo word for potato, namasi, became grenade. By the time they finished, Naval archives show that the men translated more than 600 terms from English to Navajo. More Navajo men would join the project. By the end of the war, there were more than 400 Navajo code talkers serving in every Marine division and in every battle from 1942 to 1945.
American Marines fight their way ashore.
In late October 1942, 13 Navajo code talkers were sent with the 1st Marine Division to fight at Guadalcanal Island. At first, there were several problems. The Navajo were not only occasionally mistaken to be Japanese, but so is their code. To solve this problem, the code talkers would start each message by saying New Mexico or Arizona and then continue the rest of the message in code. Their radios were primitive by today's standards. Code talker Chester Nez recalls how they used hand-crank radios to send messages. One such radio still exists in the Museum of Broadcasting in Minneapolis.
This is actually a transmitter and receiver, and it uses a hand-cranked generator to provide all the voltages needed to run it. It would have taken 2 people to operate this. One to sit and crank it while the other one either talked, because there's a mic input on this, or they could have used a telegraph key like this strapped to their leg. And worst case scenario, crank this with one hand while they're tapping out the code with the other.
As primitive as the equipment was, it worked, and so did the code talkers. They reformed battlefield communications, and they became an indispensable weapon against the Japanese.
Closing in on Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima.
When the code talkers landed on Iwo Jima with the Marines in February of 1945, they sent 800 messages in the first 48 hours. They didn't make a single mistake. The Navajo code talkers were able to transmit locations of hidden tunnels up Mount Suribachi and places where the Japanese kept their extra weapons. After the Marines won the battle, Major Howard Connor said, were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have won Iwo Jima.
625 miles from Tokyo.
The surrender documents by which Japan agrees to lay down arms.
On September 2nd, 1945, after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan surrendered, ending World War II. With the end of the war, there was no longer any use for the Navajo code talkers. Philip Johnston's revolutionary idea reformed how Native Americans were used in the military to win a war. But the reaction of the government and the American people never came. Because the military considered their code top secret, the Navajo were sworn to silence. They did not receive medals and were not even noticed. The United States declassified the Navajo Code in 1968, but the code talkers still received no recognition. New Mexico Senator Jeff Bingaman changed that. In a letter responding to his work with the code talkers, Senator Bingaman wrote, on December 22, 2000, President Clinton signed into law the Honoring the Navajo Code Talkers Act, a bill I introduced in the Senate. Though their recognition was delayed, in 2001, Congress expressed the gratitude of the entire nation to these brave veterans for their contributions and sacrifice in the struggle for freedom and democracy through the presentation of gold and silver medals.
Today, America honors 29 Native Americans.
It was President Bush who presented the medals to the code talkers on November 24, 2001. Today, Chester Nez is the only remaining survivor of the original 29 Navajo code talkers.
I really enjoyed being one of the original, the first 29 that developed the code and went through World War II.
The Navajo code talkers played a revolutionary role in helping the U.S. to win the War of the Pacific. They launched the foundation for great reform in how the government used Native Americans in the military. While the reaction and recognition of their achievements took more than 50 years, they proved how great things can happen when you put the past behind you and work towards a greater cause.